In this video, I'm going to be demonstrating some of the Celtic ring patterns that can be produced with a Celtic ring jig, as was described in our previous videos. I'll be creating a number of small bowls with bases so that the Celtic ring patterns can be observed both on the outside as well as the inside of these bowls. I'll be using some 2" by 2" by 5" blocks of cherry and walnut as a basic bowl material. For the Celtic ring inserts, I'll be using a variety of materials consisting of catalogs and walnut for dark wood, some maple for some white wood, and even some multi-layered woods I've created special for this project. I've designed a number of possible Celtic ring patterns for these bowls, consisting of between 4 and 16 inserts per bowl. Once again, the Celtic ring jig will be used in conjunction with the Accu-Slice rail system on my Laguna bandsaw to cut the slots for these wood inserts. On the bandsaw, I'll be using a Timberwolf bandsaw blade, 10 teeth per inch by 1/2 inch wide, rake tooth design to make the cuts for the wood inserts. The curve of this blade is 50,000ths of an inch thick. Therefore, the wood inserts must be between 46,000ths and 50,000 inch thick in order to accurately fit into the slots in the boards. The wood inserts for this project can be easily and accurately cut utilizing the Accu-Slice bandsaw accessory. An initial cut is made to square out the surface of the board so that all subsequent board slices will have perfectly parallel surfaces. The indexer is then advanced 50,000ths of an inch to allow for the bandsaw blade thickness, and then advanced an additional between 45 and 50,000ths of an inch to cut the board to the required thickness for the wood inserts. After cutting, the only sanding that is required is to sand the edges of the board with 220 grit sandpaper to remove the fuzzies or small splinters on the edges of the board. First thing I need to set a few parameters on the system before we start cutting. First thing I need to do is check the blade to make sure it's perfectly perpendicular to the surface of my Celtic ring jig. And I'm right on. If it wasn't on, I'd need to adjust the table on the bandsaw itself to bring it into square. Next thing I need to do is adjust the angle. And I'm going to be cutting these boards at 60 degrees. So I've set it 60 degrees in some octave position. Next thing I need to do is adjust the blade so it doesn't go into my fence. I want to stop 100,000ths of an inch short of going into the fence. So I have a spacer here 100,000ths of an inch thick. I just insert that here, push the blade against it, and then I adjust my stop out here. And once that piece of wood is removed, my blade stops 100,000ths inch short of going completely through my board and into the fence. Next thing I usually do is on my board, this is my board I'm going to be using, I label the sides. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I do that because I want to be cutting these boards in sequence. In other words, I'll be doing cut on surface 1 first, then 2, then 3, then 4, to give me my true Celtic ring pattern. So in the first case, I put side number 1 against the fence. When I do the second cut, I put side 2 against the fence and just keep repeating it. So we'll start with side 1. And the first thing I need to do is adjust my 2 stops. And in this case, I want my first ring to be about, well, maybe 3/4 of an inch from the top of my board. So I just set that to where I want to start, in this case around 3/4. And bring both stops in. And that holds the board, it doesn't go in either direction. The next thing I do is use these wood clamps to hold the wood in position. And I'm actually clamping the board on both sides of the bandsaw cut. And the reason for that is, after you do the cut, the wood is pretty weak, it can flex. And by clamping both sides, it can't move, and the blade won't take any additional wood off as you remove it from the saw curve. Next thing you want to do is make sure that these clamps and boards are clear of the bandsaw blade path. You especially don't want to be cutting into the aluminum clamps. So you cut into the wood but not to the clamps. And as you're doing that, you're pushing the wood down against the table, against the stop, and against the carriage. So it gets the wood exactly in the correct position. After that's all done, we're ready to do our first cut. Now what I'm going to be doing next, I'm not just be doing one of these blocks, I'm going to be doing actually doing 5 at the same time. These blocks are all the same length, and because it takes so long to glue these up, I need to set it like a half an hour between each glue step. I can actually do 5 at once and it'll just speed the process up. I can do 5 at a time, I can do 1. So I'll just keep cutting and I'll cut all 5 of these blocks with the first ring. And then after the first set of rings, the pattern may change, but for the first set of rings, the pattern will be the same. Against the fence. And in this case, I never moved the bottom clamp. I only just moved the top clamp. So the bottom clamp will stay in position for all my cuts. Based on my patterns, I laid out 5 unique patterns for these 5 blocks I cut using different discs. And this is a walnut, I'm just using maple. This is a cherry, I'm using some alternating woods in it. Another piece of walnut with just maple. Another piece of cherry with alternating white and black. And this is a unique one, I'm not sure this is going to work. This is a multicolored laminate strip I put together, and I'll see how strong it is going in, but we'll give it a try. So the first thing I need to do is put some sandpaper down the kerf just to get rid of the sawdust in the kerf, and then across the edges to get rid of the fuzzies, like the splinters. See on the back side there's a little bit. And this is going to be a plain maple. And do a dry fit, make sure it fits. Once again, if it doesn't fit dry, it's never going to fit when it has glue on it. So we got a nice tight fit, no gaps, goes the whole way down to the bottom. I have some scrap pieces here which are a little bit smaller than 50,000s. They're just good for putting glue in the joints initially. And the reason I try to get some glue in here is just to have the cross grain absorb some of that initial glue that's just get a little bit of glue in there to hopefully get a better glue joint when I put the actual block in. Then I'll go ahead and coat my piece that I'm going to insert with glue on both sides. Make sure it's thoroughly coated. Once you put this insert piece of wood in the joint, you can't fool around too much, because once that glue starts to set, you cannot move it. And the glue I'm using is Type Bond 2 Extend, so it's a little longer setup time. So I push that the whole way down. Wipe off the excess glue. Put a couple clamps on it. Okay, I let those set for at least a half an hour before I sand them. And then I'll repeat the process on the other three sides. So it's got a few hours work to get all these glued in. Okay, so the glue's starting to set up and dry now, so I'm ready to start sanding to get these flush. In order to get my various insert patterns on the blocks that I'm making, and to get these spacings exact and repeatable from one block to the next and from one side to the next, I've created a series of spacers. And these spacers are made out of aluminum. I have some 3/16 inch thick spacers, 1/4 inch, 3/8 and 1/2 inch spacers. So in order to create a pattern such as this, I would first of all put the block against my stop and do my first cut, create my first slot. The next step would be, after that's all glued in and sanded down, I want to move it up 3/16 of an inch. All I do is I put my second spacer in and I do my second cut. Again, repeating the inserting and gluing and sanding. Then to do the third line, I just insert a second spacer. That gives me a third line. If I wanted a fourth line, I could add a third spacer. And because these spacers are all the exact same thickness, I can get repeatable, exact patterns that are repeatable on one side and actually repeatable on all sides of the block as I'm making all my cuts. To create a more complex pattern such as this with different spacings, again, I would make my first cut, then I would put my spacing, in this case with a 1/2 inch spacing, and do that. If I wanted another 3/16 spacing, I could do this. So I just keep using the spacer to get me accurate, reproducible spacings on my various insert wood pieces. So I'm ready to start cutting the next set of rings. And as I said before, this block does not move, but this top one will move. And what we're doing here is we're going to be putting a 3/16 inch spacer in here, and then putting position 1 against the fence, and then locking it in place. So this will move my ring down here 3/16 of an inch. And I can check that. So I'm going to lock the block in place. Again, making sure the path is clear of the blade path. And then we'll cut this ring and do the other set of blocks in the same manner, and then go around and do all 3 of the other sides to complete the set of rings in all these blocks. I've completed 2 layers of inserts in each of these 5 blocks. So there's 8 segments in each of the blocks. According to my plan, these 2 blocks are actually done. That's all that's going to be done on these 2. So I'll be allowing those to dry overnight, and I'll be putting those in the lathe tomorrow and turning them. This one in particular is going to be interesting because it has this multi-layer insert. So we'll see what that looks like when it comes off the lathe. This block will get 1 more layer, and these 2 blocks get 2 more layers before they're complete. So I'll continue with these, adding more rings to these. The spacing is different on all of these, so I'll be adjusting that accordingly. And we'll get those finished up hopefully tomorrow or the next day. This block's going to have 3 layers, each equal distance spacing. So this first spacing was 3/16. I have 1 insert in there for that. I'll be adding a second one to move it down another 3/16 of an inch. This block's going to have 2 more sets of rings, and the spacing between the 2 sets is going to be a ½ an inch. So it's at a 3/16 spacing, I'm going to add a ½ inch spacing. And then we'll cut that as we did before. This block's also going to have 4 rings on each side. Very similar to the last one, except the spacing is going to be a 1/4 inch instead of ½ inch. So I have 1/4 inch spacing to this one. That completes the 3rd layer in these 3 blocks. So each of these 3 blocks now has 3 inserts on each side for a total of 12 inserts per block on all the sides. This block is actually done now. According to my plan, that's all I'm going to be doing on this one, so that one will be finished. However, these 2 blocks will each receive an additional insert to give a total of 16 inserts in each of these 2 blocks, with again different spacing on the 2 blocks. Next block has spacers consisting of a 1/4 inch spacer, a 3/16 inch spacer, which is the last cut, and then additional 3/16 inch spacer for the final cut. And again, that lines up once again perfect. Last 2 blocks are now done. Each of these has 4 inserts on each side, different patterns and different spacings. And so they're all done now, and they're ready to put in the lathe and turn. I'm now ready to start turning the first block with the multi-layered inserts. Since this block is relatively small, I'm able to mount the block directly into a chuck. This will make it much easier to turn the inside of the block later on. I'm also using a rotating tailstock for greater stability during the initial turning. To shape the interior surface of the bowl, use a 1/4 drill bit, which will leave about a 1/4 inch of wall thickness to drill into the block. Use a lathe speed of between 600 and 800 RPM. Always drill slowly to avoid undue stress on the glue joint. Back the drill bit out frequently to clean the shavings from the interior of the cut and also from the drill bit. The inserts contain a lot of residual glue, and this can gum up the drill bit. For the first cut, drill down in the block about a 1/2 inch or until you hit the first insert. You will feel the increased resistance on the drill bit as soon as you hit the first insert. Then back out the drill bit and using a carbide tip chisel, shape the interior surface to near its final dimension. This is done in order to minimize stress on the many glued surfaces of the inserts. Repeat this process of drilling down into the block in 1/2 inch increments, followed by cleaning up of the interior surfaces until near done. Towards the end, I switched to a smaller forceps bit to give me some additional wall thickness at the bottom of the bowl. Then using lathe chisels, slowly and carefully, clean up and smooth out the interior surfaces. Finish by sanding progressively both the interior and exterior surfaces of the bowl using sandpaper from 100 down to 400 grit. Finally, using a parting tool, cut off the bowl from the block. Now these are the 5-turn piece that just came off the lathe from the Celtic ring project that we're working on. This first unit has 2 rings per side, a nice pattern, a double ring. The second one has 3 rings, and that was actually made with this multi-strip board, and you can see the white showing up there on the top. This third one was 4 rings per side. This fifth one was very similar. This also had 4 rings per pattern, but closer together. And actually I like this pattern better than this, even though it's the same number of rings. And this last one was made with this multicolored strip. It did work out pretty well. It didn't break, it was pretty strong. I was concerned about that making it. Well, that completes the Celtic ring project. Next I'll take these and give these 2 coats of shellac and then probably 2 coats of wipe-on polyurethane, and that'll finish the